The torpedo cut through the Pacific waters with deadly precision, a steel harbinger of destruction aimed at the Japanese transport ship. From the bridge of the USS Tang, Commander Richard O'Kane watched intently as his final torpedo launched, expecting another victory to crown what had already been the most successful submarine patrol in American naval history. 24 torpedoes fired, 22 direct hits, 13 enemy ships sunk, unprecedented carnage inflicted upon Imperial Japan's lifeline of maritime supply. But as the 25th torpedo left its tube at precisely 2:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944, no one aboard could have anticipated the cruel twist of fate about to unfold. The torpedo began to veer, its guidance system malfunctioning. It curved sharply left, broached the surface, and began to circle back. In that terrible moment, predator became prey. O'Kane's frantic order to turn couldn't save them. The Tang's own torpedo slammed into her port side, sending the most lethal submarine in the U.S. Navy's arsenal to the bottom of the Formosa Strait, with 78 of her crew. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now let's get to the story. The story of the USS Tang begins not in the violent depths of the Formosa Strait, but on a cold January day in 1943 at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. As American industrial might accelerated to meet the demands of global war, the keel of a new Balao-class submarine was laid down. She would be the first American vessel to bear the name Tang, named after a colorful tropical surgeonfish known for the sharp defensive spine near its tail. The symbolism wasn't subtle. This submarine would carry America's sting deep into enemy waters. The time was ripe for innovation in submarine warfare. The early years of the Pacific War had been marked by frustrating setbacks for the American submarine service. Plagued by faulty torpedoes, overly cautious tactical doctrines, and commanders too hesitant to press home attacks, American submarines had yet to fulfill their potential as commerce raiders against Japan's vulnerable supply lines. But a new breed of submarine commanders was emerging, bold, aggressive men who understood that survival in war paradoxically demanded embracing danger rather than avoiding it. One such officer was Lieutenant Commander Richard Hetherington "Dick" O'Kane. A 1934 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, O'Kane had already distinguished himself as the executive officer aboard the legendary USS Wahoo under Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton. Together, they had pioneered aggressive new tactics that revolutionized submarine warfare in the Pacific. When O'Kane received orders to command the newly commissioned USS Tang, he brought with him not just experience, but a philosophy: attack relentlessly, press every advantage, and never give the enemy a moment to breathe. Enter Dudley "Mush" Morton and his executive officer, Dick O'Kane. Aboard the USS Wahoo, they developed and implemented revolutionary tactics: surface attacks at night using radar to track targets, aggressive penetration of anchorages and harbors, coordinated wolf pack tactics, and high-speed surface pursuit of fleeing merchant vessels. Morton became known for his boldness, even recklessness, but his success was undeniable. Under his command, the Wahoo became one of the most lethal submarines in the Pacific, and O'Kane absorbed every lesson of this new aggressive approach to submarine warfare. In January 1943, as Tang's keel was being laid at Mare Island, O'Kane was still serving as XO aboard Wahoo during some of her most successful patrols. His reputation grew alongside Morton's, with naval observers noting that the duo functioned almost as a single operational mind. O'Kane's skill at the periscope became legendary. He could identify targets, estimate range and bearing, and set up firing solutions with uncanny precision. When the time came to select a commander for the new submarine Tang, O'Kane was an obvious choice. He would take the lessons learned aboard Wahoo and apply them to his own command. The construction of Tang proceeded with remarkable speed, reflecting the urgency of the war effort. In peacetime, building a submarine might take years, but in wartime America, industrial efficiency had been honed to a razor's edge. The Belial class represented the apex of American submarine design in World War II. Larger, faster, and able to dive deeper than their predecessors, these boats were designed to range far across the Pacific and strike at the heart of Japan's maritime commerce. With a submerged displacement of 2,400 tons, a length of 311 feet, and armed with 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward, 4 aft, Tang was a formidable predator. The submarine's diesel-electric propulsion system provided both range and stealth. On the surface, 4 massive diesel engines drove the boat at speeds up to 20 knots and charged the batteries that would power her submerged operations. Beneath the waves, electric motors could drive Tang at 8 to 9 knots for short bursts, though extended underwater operations required slower speeds to conserve battery power. With a test depth of 400 feet, Tang could dive deeper than most Japanese depth charges could reach, providing a margin of safety in emergency situations. On August 17, 1943, Tang slid down the ways at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, sponsored by Mrs. Antonio S. Peter, the wife of a shipyard director. The champagne bottle broke against her bow, and the sleek submarine entered the water for the first time. 2 months later, on October 15, 1943, USS Tang was officially commissioned, with Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane assuming command. In his commissioning speech, O'Kane was brief but determined. "This boat will be going in harm's way. We will be aggressive. We will bring the fight to the enemy." After commissioning, Tang underwent an intensive fitting-out period, during which the myriad systems and components necessary for her operation were installed and tested. A submarine is one of the most complex machines ever designed, with no room for error in its construction or operation. A minor leak or equipment failure could send the boat and her entire crew to the bottom. Once fitting out was complete, Tang moved south to San Diego for 18 days of intensive training. O'Kane worked his men relentlessly, drilling them in every aspect of submarine operations. Diving drills, damage control scenarios, surface gun actions, torpedo attacks. The crew practiced until each man could perform his duties blindfolded if necessary. O'Kane instituted his own unique training regimen, having his men practice periscope recognition and range drills to develop split-second tactical decision-making. He knew that in the chaos of combat, seconds would determine the difference between success and failure, between life and death. The intensity of the training built not just skill, but camaraderie. A submarine crew is a uniquely close-knit community, forced to live in the closest possible quarters under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. There is no room for anything but absolute trust among submariners. Each man's life depends on the competence and dedication of every other member of the crew. Tang's men learned to function as a single organism, responding to changing situations with the coordinated precision of a well-tuned machine. The personal backgrounds of Tang's crew reflected the diversity of wartime America. Farm boys from the Midwest served alongside city kids from the coasts. College-educated officers worked hand in hand with men who had never finished high school. What united them was a volunteer spirit. Every submariner in World War II was a volunteer, as the Navy recognized that the unique psychological pressures of submarine service required men who had chosen that path. They also tended to be young. The average age aboard Tang was just 24, with some crew members as young as 17. Many had joined the submarine service for the extra pay. Submariners received 50% more than their surface fleet counterparts, reflecting the additional dangers they faced. On January 8, 1944, Tang arrived at Pearl Harbor, the headquarters of the U.S. Pacific Submarine Fleet and the staging ground for her combat operations. Here she underwent 2 more weeks of exercises in preparation for combat. The The submarine bastion at Pearl was a hive of activity, with boats coming and going at all hours as they departed for war patrols or returned for refit. The submariners had their own unique culture and facilities, somewhat separate from the rest of the naval base. They ate the best food in the Navy, enjoyed more relaxed discipline when ashore, and were accorded a respect born of the recognition that their service was among the most dangerous in the war. At Pearl Harbor, Tang received her final combat preparations. Torpedoes, the submarine's primary weapon, were loaded into her 10 tubes, with reloads stowed in the torpedo rooms. The Mark 14 torpedo had been the standard weapon of American submarines early in the war, but it had been plagued by problems, including a tendency to run too deep magnetic exploders that failed to detonate, and contact exploders that often failed on angled impacts. By the time Tang was preparing for her first patrol, many of these issues had been addressed, but torpedo reliability remained a concern for all submarine commanders. Tang would carry a mix of the older Mark 14 steam-powered torpedoes and the newer Mark 18 electric torpedoes, which left no wake to betray their approach but were slower and had shorter range. As Tang prepared for her first war patrol, the men settled into the rhythm of submarine life. Space was at an absolute premium. Every cubic inch of the boat was utilized for equipment, supplies, or living quarters. Officers shared tiny staterooms while enlisted men hot-bunked, with 3 sailors typically sharing 2 bunks in 8-hour rotations. Personal possessions were limited to what could fit in a small locker. The galley, though tiny, turned out remarkably good food, a tradition in the submarine service where morale was recognized as critical to operational effectiveness. The heat, humidity, and distinctive odor of a submarine, a mixture of diesel fuel, sweat, cooking odors, and the chemical tang of battery acid, became the background of daily existence. The psychological pressures of submarine life were unique and intense. Operating in an environment that could kill them instantly if the hull was breached, unable to see the sun or breathe fresh air for weeks at a time, and facing enemy action that could come without warning, submariners developed coping mechanisms ranging from dark humor to superstitious rituals. Some wore the same unwashed clothing during successful attacks, believing it brought luck. Others refused to mention certain words or phrases thought to invite disaster. These traditions and rituals became part of the cultural fabric of submarine life, both acknowledgments of the danger and psychological buffers against fear. January 22, 1944, marked Tang's departure from Pearl Harbor on her first war patrol, bound for the Caroline Islands, Mariana Islands area. O'Kane was determined to draw first blood quickly to establish the aggressive tempo that would define Tang's operational style. The crew's anticipation was palpable. They had trained extensively, but now they would face the ultimate test of combat. As the submarine slipped past the anti-submarine nets protecting Pearl Harbor and headed into the open Pacific, the men settled into their wartime routine: 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off, with sleep frequently interrupted by general quarters calls or emergency drills. 26 days after leaving Pearl Harbor on February 17th, Tang encountered her first targets, a convoy consisting of 2 freighters, 5 smaller ships, and their escorts. In the pre-dawn darkness, O'Kane maneuvered Tang into attack position. This was the moment every submariner both anticipated and dreaded, the first attack, when training would be put to the test against a real enemy. The tension in the control room was palpable, as O'Kane called for periscope depth and began his approach calculations. An enemy escort suddenly appeared at 7,000 yards and closing. The Japanese had developed increasingly effective anti-submarine tactics as the war progressed, and their escort vessels were equipped with sonar capable of detecting a submarine at periscope depth. O'Kane knew that any hesitation could be fatal. He ordered Tang to dive deep to avoid detection, a decision that proved prescient when the crew heard the distinctive pinging of enemy sonar, followed by the terrifying sound of depth charges exploding in the water around them. For the men experiencing their first depth charging, it was a baptism by fire. Though the explosions were not close enough to cause damage, the psychological impact was profound. Each detonation sent shock waves through the hull, causing lights to flicker and loose items to rattle ominously. The knowledge that a single, well-placed depth charge could rupture the pressure hull and send them all to a crushing death, hundreds of feet below the surface, was impossible to ignore. Yet the crew performed their duties with calm professionalism, maintaining silence and awaiting O'Kane's next command. After the escort moved off, Tang returned to periscope depth and resumed the attack. The range to the nearest freighter closed to 3,500 yards, point-blank range in submarine warfare. O'Kane ordered a spread of 4 torpedoes. The boat shuddered slightly as each torpedo left its tube, the compressed air expulsion system sending the weapons on their way toward the target. Then came the anxious wait. Depending on range and speed settings, torpedoes could take over a minute to reach their target. For that eternal minute, the control room was silent, except for the soft hum of electrical equipment and the sound of men holding their breath. 3 of the 4 torpedoes found their mark, and the 6,800-ton Gyoten Maru slipped beneath the waves, stern first. The explosion of a torpedo hitting a ship was unmistakable, a deep, resonant boom that transmitted through the water to shake the submarine like a physical blow. Through the periscope, O'Kane could see the devastation as the Japanese freighter broke apart and began to sink. For the men of Tang, who could not see the results of their handiwork directly, the confirmation from their skipper that they had scored their first kill sent a wave of exhilaration through the boat. They were no longer untested. They had drawn first blood. The Tang's first kill sent electric excitement through the crew. The submarine cleared the area by running deep, then attempted to get ahead of the remaining ships for a dawn attack. This was classic submarine strategy: withdraw after an initial attack to avoid counterattack, then reposition to strike again from an unexpected direction. O'Kane was implementing the lessons he had learned aboard Wahoo, where Morton had demonstrated the effectiveness of persistent, aggressive pursuit of enemy convoys. Japanese convoy commanders, trained to expect a single attack followed by the submarine's withdrawal, were often unprepared for this kind of relentless predation. 5 days later, on February 22nd, the Tang struck again, sinking the Fukuyama Maru. This second attack further boosted the crew's confidence. They were proving themselves as an effective fighting unit, and O'Kane's aggressive tactics were yielding results. After shadowing the convoy for another hour, O'Kane ordered a third attack, sending the Yamashimo Maru to the bottom with catastrophic internal explosions. The succession of successful attacks established a pattern that would become Tang's trademark: relentless pressure on enemy shipping, attacking again and again, until either all targets were sunk or all torpedoes expended. By the time the Tang returned to Pearl Harbor on March 8th, she had expended all her torpedoes, sinking 5 ships totaling 18,000 tons of Japanese shipping and scoring hits with an impressive 16 out of 24 torpedoes fired. For a first patrol, this was an extraordinary achievement. The average submarine might sink 2 or 3 ships on a successful patrol. Tang had more than doubled that figure. The submarine's success validated both the design of the Balao class and O'Kane's aggressive tactical approach. Admiral Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, personally congratulated O'Kane and his crew upon their return. In an era when many submarine commanders were still hesitant to press home attacks, O'Kane's boldness stood out. Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, recognized he had an exceptional commander and boat on his hands. The Tang was quickly resupplied and sent back out for her second patrol, which began on March 16, 1944. This mission would take her to waters around the Palaos, to Davao Gulf, and to the approaches to Truk, all critical Japanese strongholds in the western Pacific. This patrol would prove unique. Though Tang made 5 surface contacts, she had no opportunity to launch attacks. Instead, she was assigned to lifeguard duty near Truk during American carrier raids on the Japanese base. The submarine's mission was to rescue downed American aviators who might be forced to ditch at sea. On April 30th, 1944, Tang received word that American pilots were in the water near Truk Lagoon. A Vought OS-2U Kingfisher floatplane from the USS North Carolina had landed inside Truk Lagoon to recover downed airmen, but could not take off again due to the weight of 9 rescued aviators crammed aboard. Tang moved in close to the dangerous waters near Truk to rescue the men. The submarine took aboard the stranded airmen from the Kingfisher and ultimately rescued a total of 22 American aviators in this mission, setting a record for submarine rescue operations and earning the crew their first Presidential Unit citation. O'Kane's willingness to risk his submarine by approaching so close to a Japanese stronghold spoke volumes about his character and his understanding of the war's true objective, not just sinking ships but bringing American servicemen home alive. The Tang returned to Pearl Harbor to a hero's welcome. Photographs taken at the time show Commander O'Kane standing proudly with the 22 airmen his submarine had rescued, a powerful reminder that, amid the destructive necessities of war, the Tang had proven herself equally adept at saving lives. For the airmen who might otherwise have faced capture, torture, or execution by the Japanese, the submarine's timely arrival had been nothing short of miraculous. The mission highlighted the versatility of submarines in modern warfare, not merely instruments of destruction, but platforms capable of conducting a wide range of operations from intelligence gathering to personnel recovery. Tang's third war patrol, which began on June 8, 1944, would enter the annals of submarine warfare as one of the most devastating deployments against Japanese shipping in World War II. Operating in the treacherous waters of the East China Sea and Yellow Sea, areas heavily patrolled by Japanese anti-submarine forces, O'Kane hunted with a predator's instinct. On June 24th, southwest of Kagoshima, Tang contacted a convoy of 6 large ships guarded by 16 escorts, a formidable defensive screen that would have given many commanders pause, not O'Kane. He ordered a surface attack, the Tang slicing through the night waters with only her conning tower exposed, a spectral presence among the enemy ships. He fired a spread of 3 torpedoes at one ship and quickly launched another spread at a second target. Explosions lit up the night as Tang reported 2 ships sunk. However, post-war examination of Japanese records would reveal that 4 ships had actually been sunk: the Tomahoko Maru, Tainan Maru, Nasusan Maru, and Kenichi Maru. The torpedo spreads had caught additional victims as ships overlapped in the chaos of the attack. In a tragic irony, one of these vessels, the Tomahoko Maru, was carrying 772 Allied prisoners of war, 560 of whom perished in the attack, a heartbreaking reminder of war's complexity and the unintended consequences that often accompany even the most successful military operations. 6 days later, on June 30th, while patrolling the shipping lane from Kyushu to Dairen, Tang sighted a cargo ship steaming without escort, a solitary victim far from help. After an initial attack that resulted in 2 missed torpedoes, Tang went deep to avoid depth charges, then surfaced to give chase. O'Kane pursued relentlessly until closing to 750 yards, then fired a single torpedo that split the Nikan Maru in half, sending 3,200 Japanese soldiers to a watery grave. The following morning, Tang spotted a tanker and freighter. While the submarine sank the freighter Taiyun Maru No. 2, the tanker Takatori Maru No. 1 attempted to flee. Tang pursued until nightfall, then launched 2 torpedoes, which sent the tanker to the bottom. By the time Tang concluded her third patrol, she had sunk an unprecedented 10 enemy ships totaling over 39,000 tons of Japanese shipping, the highest number of ships ever sunk on a single American submarine patrol during the war. Life aboard Tang during these relentless hunting expeditions was intense and exhausting. The crew operated on a battle rhythm dictated by the demands of submarine warfare. 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off, though sleep was often interrupted by emergency drills or actual combat alerts. The interior of the submarine was a cramped, humid environment of machine oil, sweat, and the pervasive odor of 80 men living in close quarters with limited bathing facilities. The air grew increasingly foul as patrols lengthened, with carbon dioxide levels rising and oxygen growing thin. The food, initially varied and even excellent by military standards, deteriorated in quality as fresh provisions were consumed, leaving only canned goods and dehydrated meals. Yet morale aboard Tang remained remarkably high. Each successful attack validated the crew's training and bolstered their confidence. They took pride in serving under O'Kane, whose reputation for both tactical brilliance and concern for his men inspired loyalty. The submarine service had developed its own unique culture, a blend of professionalism, superstition, and gallows humor. Submariners wore their Dolphins insignia with pride, knowing they were part of an elite brotherhood. They developed rituals and traditions, lucky clothing items worn during attacks, specific phrases avoided as harbingers of bad luck, and celebrations when crossing the equator or after successful missions. Tang's 4th War Patrol took her into the most dangerous waters of all, directly off the Japanese home islands. From July 31 to September 3, 1944, she prowled the coast of Honshu, striking at the heart of Japan's maritime traffic. On August 11th, Tang located 2 enemy freighters with 2 escorts. The submarine fired 3 torpedoes at the larger freighter and 2 at another ship. The larger freighter exploded spectacularly after one of the torpedoes hit her boilers. After the attack, Tang went deep to avoid the inevitable depth charge counterattack. For 38 minutes, the crew endured the terrifying concussions of depth charges, each explosion potentially fatal if too close. The submarine's hull creaked under the immense pressure, pipes leaked, and light fixtures swayed with each detonation. But Tang's luck held, and she surfaced to periscope level to find 2 escorts in sight, one rescuing survivors from the sunken ship. 3 days later, on August 14th, O'Kane ordered an unusual attack. Tang's deck gun was used to sink a Japanese patrol yacht, the 5-inch shells reducing the vessel's deckhouse to splinters. On August 22nd, Tang sank a 225-foot patrol boat, and the following day spotted a large transport with Japanese sailors in white uniforms visible on her superstructure and bridge. Tang fired 3 torpedoes with 2 hits, sending the 8,135-ton Tsukushi Maru to the bottom. On August 25th, just before concluding the patrol, Tang attacked a tanker and an escort with her last 3 torpedoes, sinking the tanker number 8, Nanko Maru. Tang then returned to Pearl Harbor with another impressive tally, 7 ships sunk. Tang's reputation now preceded her. In just 4 patrols, she had sunk 21 enemy vessels, damaging several others, and rescued 22 American airmen. The submarine had become a legend within the fleet, and O'Kane was recognized as one of the most successful submarine commanders of the war. His methods, once considered dangerously aggressive, were now being studied and emulated throughout the submarine force. The very tactics that Morton and O'Kane had pioneered aboard Wahoo, surface night attacks, aggressive pursuit, and a willingness to penetrate enemy formations rather than attacking from the periphery, had become standard operating procedure for American submarines seeking to maximize their effectiveness. The timing of Tang's success was crucial. By mid-1944, the strategic situation in the Pacific had evolved dramatically. American forces were advancing across the Central Pacific, island by island, while MacArthur's forces drove northward through New Guinea toward the Philippines. Japan, increasingly desperate, was pouring reinforcements and supplies into its threatened territories. The Imperial Japanese Navy, severely weakened by losses at Midway, the Solomon Islands, and the Philippine Sea, could no longer provide adequate escort protection to merchant convoys. This created ideal hunting conditions for American submarines, which could now operate with greater freedom and less risk. On September 24, 1944, Tang departed Pearl Harbor for her fifth war patrol. After topping off her fuel tanks at Midway Island, she sailed for the Formosa Strait on September 27th. The mission was clear: interdict Japanese shipping supporting the defense of the Philippines, where General MacArthur was poised to make his promised return. To reach her patrol area, Tang had to pass through narrow waters known to be heavily patrolled by the Japanese. A large area stretching northeast from Formosa was known to be mined by the enemy, and O'Kane was given a choice: make the passage north of Formosa alone or join a coordinated attack group consisting of the submarines Silversides, Trigger, and Salmon under Commander John S. Coy. O'Kane, true to his independent nature, chose to make the dangerous passage alone. Tang disappeared into the vastness of the Pacific, maintaining radio silence as she moved into enemy waters. No American base would hear from her again. What we know of Tang's final patrol comes from the report of her surviving commanding officer and the handful of men who lived through what followed. On the night of October 10-11, Tang struck her first targets of the patrol, sinking the cargo ships Joshu Go and Oita Maru off the west coast of Formosa. For the next 12 days, Tang continued to hunt in treacherous waters, sighting several enemy ships but unable to close to attack range. Then, on the night of October 23rd, Tang made radar contact with a large convoy consisting of 3 tankers, a transport, a freighter, and numerous escorts. This convoy was laden with reinforcements and supplies for the Japanese forces fighting desperately against MacArthur's return to the Philippines. O'Kane planned a daring night surface attack. As darkness enveloped the Formosa Strait, Tang slipped into the middle of the enemy formation, a wolf among sheep. Gunfire erupted as the submarine was spotted, but O'Kane held his nerve. Tang fired torpedoes in rapid succession, hitting the freighters and tankers with devastating accuracy. Within minutes, the night was transformed into a hellscape of burning ships, explosions, and desperate Japanese sailors abandoning their sinking vessels. One of Tang's officers would later describe the scene. The sea was on fire, ships were blowing up all around us. The night had turned to day with the glow of burning tankers and freighters. Japanese escorts were firing wildly, as much at each other as at us. Tang cleared the area at flank speed, leaving behind a convoy in ruins. All 5 of the merchant vessels were either sunk or burning, and Japanese escorts, confused in the chaos, began firing at each other in the darkness. It was one of the most spectacular submarine attacks of the war, but O'Kane wasn't finished. Following the doctrine of calculated recklessness that had served him so well, he decided to return to the area the following night to hunt for survivors of the shattered convoy. On the evening of October 24th, Tang again made radar contact with Japanese ships, another convoy. This one consisting of heavily laden transports carrying reinforcements and supplies for the Leyte campaign, with crated aircraft visible on their decks. Once more, O'Kane ordered a surface attack. Tang broke into the convoy's defensive screen, firing torpedoes with precision. 2 torpedoes each slammed into a transport and a tanker. 5 ships were hit, and the night was again illuminated by the glow of burning vessels. As Tang maneuvered for a final attack, a Japanese transport attempted to ram the submarine. O'Kane ordered emergency speed and a hard rudder, barely avoiding collision. The submarine then fired at another damaged transport, the 24th and last torpedo in her inventory, except for a single remaining weapon in the stern tubes. With this successful attack, Tang had now sunk an unprecedented 13 ships on a single patrol. It was time to head for home. But O'Kane, seeing a crippled transport within range, decided to finish it off with Tang's final torpedo. At 2:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944, the 25th torpedo was launched from Tang's stern tube. The torpedo was observed running true at first, and the firing report came back hot, straight, and normal. Then, to the horror of those watching, the torpedo began to veer sharply left. It broached the surface, porpoising through the water, and began a circular run back toward Tang. On the bridge, O'Kane frantically ordered emergency speed and a hard rudder to avoid the approaching torpedo. But physics and fate were against them. Tang could not move quickly enough, and 20 seconds after firing, the submarine was struck by her own torpedo on the port side near the after torpedo room. The explosion was catastrophic, instantly killing everyone in the after compartments. The submarine began to sink rapidly by the stern. O'Kane and the men on the bridge were thrown into the water by the force of the explosion. Below decks, chaos reigned as compartments flooded, and men struggled to escape the sinking vessel. Tang plunged to the bottom, coming to rest in 180 feet of water. Of the 87 men aboard, 78 would not survive. Some died in the initial explosion, others drowned as the submarine sank, and still others were trapped in the forward compartments, alive but facing a slow death by suffocation or the desperate gamble of attempting an escape from the sunken vessel. In the forward torpedo room, about 30 survivors gathered. They were faced with a horrific choice: remain in the compartment and die when their air ran out, or attempt a perilous escape using Momsen lungs, an early underwater breathing apparatus that few had actually trained with beyond basic familiarization. As the trapped men considered their options, Japanese patrol boats began dropping depth charges on the sunken Tang, perhaps unaware she was already on the bottom. The depth charges triggered an electrical fire in the forward battery compartment, forcing the men's hand. Escape was now their only option. The men began the dangerous process of flooding the escape trunk, donning their Momsen lungs, and exiting the submarine one by one through the forward hatch. The Momsen lung, named after its inventor, Charles B. Momsen, was a rudimentary rebreather device that allowed submariners to ascend from a sunken submarine. It consisted of a rubber-breathing bag containing soda lime to absorb exhaled carbon dioxide, connected to a mouthpiece by which the user would breathe and exhale into the bag. The device recycled the user's breath, supplementing it with a small amount of oxygen from a canister. It had never before been used in a real submarine disaster. The first men to attempt the escape faced terrifying conditions: total darkness, rising water, and the pressing knowledge that any mistake meant death. They had to wait as the escape trunk flooded completely, then open the exterior hatch against the pressure of 180 feet of sea water, all while maintaining their composure and controlling their breathing through an unfamiliar device. The physics of pressure at that depth meant that any rushed ascent could lead to fatal embolism as dissolved gases in the bloodstream expanded too rapidly. Of the 30 men who gathered in the forward torpedo room, only 13 managed to escape from the submarine. Of those 13, only 8 reached the surface alive. 5 men had also survived from the bridge, including O'Kane, making a total of just 9 survivors from the Tang's crew of 87. Reaching the surface was not the end of their ordeal. The men found themselves in oil-slicked water amid the debris of sunken Japanese ships and the Tang herself. Several were badly injured, all were suffering from exposure, and they faced the grim reality of being adrift in hostile waters. The 9 survivors, including Commander O'Kane, were picked up by a Japanese patrol boat the following morning. Their ordeal was far from over. Identified as submariners, they were beaten by their captors, many of whom had lost comrades to American submarine attacks. The Tang survivors were taken to the Ofuna interrogation camp, a secret facility where they were held as special prisoners outside the protections of the Geneva Convention. For the remaining 10 months of the war, O'Kane and his men endured brutal treatment, starvation, disease, and psychological torture. O'Kane lost over 70 pounds during his captivity. The survivors were subjected to interrogations where they refused to divulge technical information about American submarines, despite beatings and threats of execution. Their resistance in the face of such treatment speaks to their extraordinary courage and dedication. Back in the United States, the Tang was reported overdue and presumed lost with all hands. Families received telegrams notifying them that their loved ones were missing in action. It was only after the Japanese surrender in August 1945 that news of the survivors reached America. Of the 9 men who survived the sinking, 1 died in captivity, leaving only 8 to return home and tell the tale of the Tang's final patrol. The Tang's story is one of extraordinary success and terrible tragedy. In her short career spanning just 9 months and 5 war patrols, the submarine sank 33 Japanese ships totaling over 116,000 tons, making her the most successful American submarine of World War II in terms of both number of ships and tonnage sunk. Her commanding officer, Richard O. Kane, received the Medal of Honor for his actions during the submarine's final operations, along with 3 Navy Crosses, 3 Silver Stars, and the Legion of Merit with Combat V for his earlier patrols. O'Kane's Medal of Honor citation reads, in part, boldly maneuvering on the surface into the midst of a heavily escorted convoy, Commander O'Kane stood in the fusillade of bullets and shells from all directions to launch smashing hits on 3 tankers, coolly swung his ship to fire at a freighter, and in a split-second decision shot out of the path of an onrushing transport, missing it by inches. After the war, O'Kane continued his naval career, eventually retiring as a rear admiral in 1957. The submarine herself received 4 battle stars and 2 Presidential Unit citations for her service. He wrote 2 books about his wartime experiences: Clear the Bridge, The War Patrols of the USS Tang, and Wahoo, The Patrols of America's Most Famous World War II Submarine, documenting the revolutionary tactics he helped develop. In these works, O'Kane provided not just operational accounts, but insights into the psychology of submarine warfare, the delicate balance between aggression and caution, the mental discipline required to function effectively in an environment where death was a constant companion, and the leadership principles that enabled him to inspire his crews to exceptional performance. O'Kane never fully recovered from his prisoner of war experience. The physical toll of starvation and mistreatment left him with lifelong health issues, and like many POWs, he carried psychological scars that never completely healed. Yet he remained dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Tang and her crew, ensuring that their sacrifice and achievement would not be forgotten. He passed away on February 16, 1994, having lived long enough to see his legacy secure in naval history. The story of the Tang exemplifies both the tremendous success of American submarine warfare in World War II and its terrible cost. By war's end, American submarines had sunk over 1,300 Japanese merchant vessels and warships, crippling Japan's maritime supply lines and contributing significantly to the Allied victory. But this success came at a high price. 52 American submarines were lost during the war, with 3,505 submariners giving their lives. The Tang's loss was particularly poignant, not at the hands of the enemy, but by a cruel twist of fate in the form of a malfunctioning torpedo. Today, the Tang's legacy lives on. At the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, visitors can experience Final Mission, USS Tang Submarine Experience, an interactive exhibit that recreates the submarine's last battle. The USS O'Kane, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer commissioned in 1999, honors the Tang's valiant commander. And a tradition known as the O'Kane Cribbage Board continues in the U.S. submarine force. The wardroom of the oldest fast-attack submarine in the Pacific Fleet carries a cribbage board in honor of O'Kane, who was dealt a perfect 29-point hand while serving on the Wahoo, after which that submarine sank 2 Japanese freighters. The Tang story also lives on in the evolution of submarine warfare itself. The tactics pioneered by O'Kane and other aggressive commanders of his era, surface night attacks, coming to periscope depth for day attacks, rather than remaining fully submerged, using radar aggressively to detect and track targets, transformed submarine operations and influenced naval doctrine for generations. These innovations didn't just sink ships, they saved American lives by enabling submarines to strike more effectively while minimizing their own vulnerability. For the families of the 78 men lost aboard Tang, the submarine's extraordinary record provided little comfort. Their loved ones had perished in the cold depths of the Formosa Strait, victims not of enemy action but of a technical failure, a circular running torpedo, a persistent problem with American torpedoes that was never fully resolved during the war. Their sacrifice, however, was not in vain. The Tang and submarines like her severed Japan's maritime lifeline, hastening the end of the war and saving countless lives that would have been lost in an invasion of the Japanese home islands. Among the Tang's crew were men from all walks of American life: farm boys from the Midwest, urban youths from coastal cities, sons of immigrants seeking to prove their American identity through service, and career Navy men who had found their calling beneath the waves. Their average age was just 24, with some as young as 17. The youngest casualty aboard Tang may have been Reuben McNeil Rayford, who was only 15 years old when he died, having lied about his age to enlist. These were ordinary Americans performing extraordinary acts of courage in defense of their country. The USS Tang struck back against Japan with unprecedented effectiveness, sinking 33 ships before fate struck her down. Her story embodies both the triumph and tragedy of submarine warfare, the silent service whose contributions to victory in World War II were as crucial as they were costly. In the dark waters of the Formosa Strait, a remarkable submarine met her end, but her legacy of courage, innovation, and sacrifice endures as a testament to the extraordinary men who served aboard her and to all those who ventured beneath the waves in defense of freedom.